Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 63 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at halfandhalf_TPL. I'm joined today by the best co-host in the game. You've heard him on the Tough Cover radio show. It is Mark Henry Jr. You can give him a follow on Twitter at MarkHenryJr_. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, even though you can't see me. Don't know what's going on here with the camera, but you're going to have to just deal with my voice and deal with the takes. You know, the camera might not be working, but the takes still are.
Yeah, Mark, I have to concede our under 25 team draft from our last podcast. Mark won 52% of the votes on Twitter. It was a wider margin on YouTube. He got 64%, which is just further proof the Twitter crowd might be a little more educated than the YouTube crowd. I don't know. Mark might disagree there, but Mark is hiding his face in shame at the farce that he knows was those voting results. But we do have a great show lined up for you today. Technical difficulties aside, we are going to start our divisional preview series, and we'll still get some fun draft shows in there along the way. But we're going to start out today. We're going to preview two divisions. We're going to preview the NFC South and the NFC East. And so we're going to lead off with the NFC South, with the big news about Baker Mayfield. We're going to start in Carolina with the Panthers, and we're going to sort of recap their offseason and talk through what we expect out of these teams in this upcoming season. So, as we've got a comment rolling in here, it says, I've got to say, Mark has never looked better than today. Mark, they say you got a face for radio, right?
It's not a bad point. It's not a bad point.
All right, so let's dive into the Carolina Panthers here, and we're going to get into this, but let me run a few of these off here. So big additions for the offseason. Obviously, we've got the news. They just traded for Baker Mayfield for a conditional fifth-round pick from the Browns. They also signed Johnny Hekker, which is kind of a big deal when your offense is as bad as the Panthers was last year. You go get a good punter. And before Baker Mayfield, you could say that Johnny Hekker might have been the best quarterback on this team. They also signed Xavier Woods, who was the only player last year in the league to play every defensive snap for their team. He had 108 tackles. He was the third highest graded run defender among safeties by PFF. So they bolster the back end of their defense. And then, of course, the big news is the offensive line, a unit that was atrocious last year. They add Ike Ekwonu with the sixth pick in the first round of the draft. And then they signed Austin Corbett and Bradley Bozeman in free agency. So an offensive line that was really bad. It headlined the problems with the Panthers last year, along with Matt Rule, which I'm sure we'll talk about. That offensive line should be a little bit better. Now we flip over to guys they lost. They lost Hassan Reddick, a guy that we'll talk about when we get to the Eagles portion. And they also lost Stephon Gilmore. So those were kind of some of the big additions and subtractions for the Panthers this offseason. Mark, where do you kind of feel about – well, let's lead off with Baker Mayfield here. Talk to me about the Baker Mayfield trade.
Yeah, I texted you beforehand, and it's kind of like I don't even know what my take is on this trade. It's kind of – I guess my take is, like, why did we have to wait this long for this? Like, if it was a 2024 conditional fifth-round pick, like, how the heck did this not happen, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, however long ago you want to say? Like, I don't understand what held this up. Like, I guess Carolina, barely gave up anything. So it's really hard to kill them for it. It's really hard to be like, oh, that's a terrible move. But it's also not like, oh, now Carolina is cooking with gas. Like, I've seen people like, Baker's got CMC and DJ Moore now. And it's like, all right, like I'm not excited about it. Like, it's still Baker Mayfield, and it's still the Carolina Panthers, and it's still Matt Rule, the guy who ran Joe Brady out of town. So I don't love pretty much anything that's going on with Carolina, but I will say, like, there's people out there like, oh, why even go get Baker when you have Matt Corral? And it's like, Matt Rule's trying to save his job. Like, Matt Rule doesn't care about Matt Corral, who's not going to play until, week 8, unless he looks amazing in preseason and training camp and all that stuff. And I don't think that's going to be the case. So I think, if you're Matt Rule, you have to do everything to potentially salvage your last chance at coaching in the NFL, because you're not getting another one after this performance. So your last chance and your best option at this point was probably one of Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo. And at that point, I can't. I guess I can't kill you for choosing Baker over Jimmy G, even though I would probably prefer Jimmy G if it's just about competing this year. But it's kind of. I see. I think you said it best. Like I could see how it works out well. I could see how it flames out. Like I could see the positive and the negative side of this trade.
Yeah, on one side, you could argue that for a conditional 5th round pick to go get a former number 1 overall pick, a guy who everyone's very down on now, rightly so, but let's not forget he played through half of last season injured. He shouldn't have been on a football field. And so is Baker Mayfield as bad as he was in 2021? No. Is he worthy of, is he ever going to live up to his draft status? Probably not. But there's a shot that he could still be, a serviceable franchise quarterback. And so for a 5th round pick, that's nothing. You can take a swing at that. That's fine. On the other side, you look at what Carolina has done. That no team, maybe the Colts, have botched quarterback position as much as the Carolina Panthers. Didn't they sign Cam Newton to like a $10 million deal last year? They traded for Sam Darnold. They guaranteed his 5th-year option. Like all of these chips continue. They traded up. They traded up in the 3rd round and gave up a 3rd rounder next year to go get Matt Corral. They just totally botched this. Now, you can't walk into this season and hand the job to Matt Corral. I mean, maybe he earns it in training camp, but you can't count on that, and you can't put Sam Darnold out there again if you actually want to compete. And so now obviously the Panthers are not ready to compete. That's not where they are as a team, but it's where Matt Rule is as a head coach, which is again why you should not enter a season with a lame duck head coach. So you could make an argument they should have just played Corral, seen what they had. He's going to be bad. You tank, you get a good quarterback next year, but Matt Rule doesn't have that luxury. And so Matt Rule's not doing what's best for the team in the long term. He's doing what's best for the team in the short term and for him retaining his job. So it makes the Panthers more interesting this year. Ultimately, I don't expect Baker Mayfield to get a contract with them because Matt Rule's going to get fired probably before the end of the year, and the new coach is going to want to pick his own quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say I agree with every single thing you said there. I guess I'll just say, like, you hit on the Carolina's going to be a lot more entertaining with Baker Mayfield. If the only thing that happens of this trade is that we get Carolina and Cleveland week 1 with Baker going in there to avenge, getting tossed out for a scumbag and Deshaun Watson. I think that that at least is a fun little storyline and a fun little subplot of week 1. It's not all bad. I guess I could understand if you're a Carolina fan, like you were staring down the barrel at Sam Darnold again after last year. So it must feel pretty relieving to at least have a guy who you have seen be, I don't know, top 15 quarterback at times, probably 2 years ago.
Though, so they fire Joe Brady to scapegoat him so Matt Rule can keep his job. And then funny enough, Joe Brady runs the exact type of offense that Baker Mayfield has succeeded in. The only offense Baker Mayfield has ever succeeded in was a very Joe Brady-like offense, and they fired him over play calling philosophy differences. So they got rid of the guy that was calling the offense, and then they went and got a quarterback that works perfectly in that system. So there's just no plan here. Mm-hmm. If I'm a Panthers fan, I would just be of the opinion, just put Corral out there. He can sink or swim. He's probably going to sink. Let's go get a top 2-3 pick and get a quarterback. The problem is, like, that works in simulations, that works in Madden. Mm-hmm. Real NFL teams can't just tank a season like that. Jobs are on the line, particularly Matt Rule's job, but jobs are on the line. Fans vote with their money as well. So you can't just blatantly tank a season by walking in, with a 3rd round quarterback as your starting guy like that. And I think that's the position that they were going to be in if they didn't make a move.
Well, you technically can do that, but you have to have a new head coach and you have to have a GM who either has the job security or he's also new. Like,
sure.
In this situation, it's just not possible with Matt Rule, fighting for his job and stuff like that. But I mean, we saw it with Houston last year. Like, Lovie Smith was hired to be fired after going winning 1 or 2 games, and they threw Davis Mills out there, and that was their starter. So it does happen, but this is not. It couldn't have been one of these situations.
Yeah. So let's throw up the schedule here. So obviously you mentioned they play Cleveland in week 1, which is just hilarious. You have to think that the NFL set that up knowing that that's probably a likely destination for Baker, but I love it. I can't wait for Baker to beat the Jacoby Brissett-led Browns in week 1, talk all kinds of trash post-game, and then lose like 6 straight games and get benched for Matt Corral. That's just going to be epic.
Oh, it's unbelievable. They're definitely going 2-0 and then losing a bunch straight. In fact, I think that I predicted this exact thing happening last year. I'd have to go. I'm going to go through my tweets as we're talking. I definitely had a tweet last year where I said that, like, oh, I can't wait for the Panthers to start 3-0 and for all the Sam Darnold lovers to come out and start talking about how great he is, only for them to lose a ton of games for the rest of the year. And I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened. Yep, July 7th, 2021. I'll send it to you, and you can put it up on the screen if you want. But the Carolina Panthers are going to start off next year ripping off 3 wins against the Jets, Saints, and Texans. There's going to be a lot of Sam Darnold, Matt Rule love at 3-0, and then things are probably going to go really poorly for the rest of the year. It's exactly what I tweeted last year. I feel the exact same way this year. They're going to go 2-0 and then maybe lose 5, 6, 7, like 6 to 7 games straight, like 5 to 7 games straight, and then you'll lose to Baltimore and Denver probably later on. So yeah, it's going to be like a 5-6 win season for Carolina.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that tweet as that started to unfold last year on Chalk Talk. So that should definitely be like you need to like quote tweet that about how they're going to go 2-0 this year.
I will now.
That'll be great. So in terms of their schedule, I used Warren Sharp's strength of schedule, which is not based off of win percentage last year. It's based off of Vegas win projections this year, which I think is more accurate. I think it's a better model, but they project with the 14th easiest strength of schedule. So they don't even have a super easy strength of schedule. They're kind of middle of the pack. The Vegas over-under for win totals for this team is 6.5. Mark, gut reaction. You
under.
take the over or the under on that?
Under. I would have, before the Baker trade, it was at 5.5. I would have taken the under on that. I have them at 5-12 is what I have them at going this season. So I do think that they come in last in this division. I do think they have the potential to win maybe even 3 or 4 games. If Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, this is a team that could compete for the first pick.
Yeah. All right. That's where I've got them at too. I would take the under, and I do have them finishing last in this division. So we're clean sweep across the board there. We both have the Panthers in last place for the division. Anything else you want to get out there about the Panthers before we move on?
Just that DJ Moore is the most overrated NFL player I've ever heard of in my entire life. People rank him with receivers that he does not even belong in the same sentence with. This is more of a fantasy complaint. It seems like once a week I have like a fantasy complaint, and then I have to be like, sorry, Shane, let me talk about fantasy for a minute. But if you take DJ Moore in like the 3rd or 4th round, you're a buffoon. If you're taking DJ Moore over Mike Williams from the Chargers, I don't know what I have to say to you. Like, Mike Williams was a top 10 receiver last year. I get that there's some inconsistency, but he's got Justin freaking Herbert as his quarterback. And I get it. Keenan Allen's there as well. Keenan Allen's aging while Mike Williams is entering his prime. There's just a lot of receivers who DJ Moore is being drafted over. And I've even seen with this Baker Mayfield news that those same fantasy people are like even higher on DJ Moore now and like putting him into the top 10 to 15 in fantasy receivers. I just don't get the DJ Moore thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, you heard it here first. Don't draft DJ Moore. I'll take that. I'll take that into account if you guys swindle me into getting into the TPL Fantasy League again.
Oh, we will.
We'll see. So let's move on to the Saints here. The Saints are a team that I think a lot of people are kind of delusional about, but we'll talk about it here in a minute. This is a team that I think definitely got worse this offseason. Let's talk about their losses, and then we'll circle back and talk about their additions. So they lost Malcolm Jenkins to retirement, and they also lost Marcus Williams to free agency. So they lost both of their starting safeties. They lost their starting left tackle in Terran Armstead. And then most importantly, they lost Sean Payton, their head coach, to retirement. I think he just looked at this roster and the cap situation. He's like, you know what? just going to retire for a year or two. I fully expect Sean Payton to come back in the near future. Honestly, I expect him to be the coach of the Cowboys in the next year or two. But they went out in free agency, and they paid mega bucks to the Honey Badger to bring him in. They also signed Marcus May, Jarvis Landry, and then, of course, their big additions in the first round were Chris Olave, who I thought they traded up too high to go get, and then Trevor Penning, who you and I both thought was also a reach, but they had a major need at offensive tackle. So that's kind of where they're at headed into the season. Mark, talk to me about the Saints.
Oh, I'm completely with you on the delusional thing. Like the Saints fans and Saints Twitter, I guess I never really was like super anti-Saints, and I've never been like a huge Jameis hater or anything like that. Like I think I see the value in him, but also can kind of look at him and see him for what he is. I've never really gotten into it with Saints Twitter until this offseason. And this offseason, I guess I have a larger percentage of New Orleans followers than I thought and Saints Twitter followers than I thought. But every time I tweet about the NFL or the NFC or anything like that, they're in there telling me how the Saints are going to the playoffs and how, this is a win now team with the Saints. And that's why they made the move to get Chris Olave and all these things. And we just must be looking at different rosters, because I look at this roster, especially offensively, and I am not impressed. I am not excited. This is a team I think is going to be maybe the most disappointing team in the NFL. There's not many teams I'd rather hold the first round pick of, and that's exactly the situation that the Philadelphia Eagles are in, which I'm very excited. I think it's going to be a very fun year tracking and rooting against the Saints all year long. So we get that as good of a pick as possible. And more so than anything, like put the roster aside, put all of that aside, Sean Payton is the second best coach I've ever seen in my life of football. I think he's I don't know if that's, I'm actually curious to hear what your thoughts are on that, Shane, but I think Sean Payton behind Bill Belichick is the second best coach of my lifetime. I think what he's done in New Orleans has been nothing short of unbelievable, and how long they've been relevant and what he was able to do for Drew Brees' career and that franchise, turning them from like basically a joke into being one of the staples of the playoffs over the last decade or two. I think Sean Payton is a Hall of Famer of Hall of Famers in terms of being a coach. And New Orleans Saints fans, leave it up to them to completely disrespect the guy and act like they're actually going to be better without him. And, he was obsessed with Taysom Hill and he was doing too much weird stuff. And Dennis Allen's going to come in and he's going to fix all that stuff. And Jameis Winston's going to be perfect. And it's like, you guys are really buying in on a team that just lost one of the greatest head coaches of all time and has Jameis Winston at quarterback coming off of an ACL tear. Like this, there's so many things that can go wrong with this team. And I'm not saying Dennis Allen's an idiot. I'm not saying he's the worst coach ever. I'm not saying it was even a bad hire. But the last time he was a head coach, it was a complete train wreck and a disaster in Oakland. So I'm not necessarily saying that that's fair to judge him on, but it's also not fair to say he's going to do a better job than Sean Payton, when in my opinion, them going, I don't know exactly what their record was last year. I don't know if you have that in 9-8. Yeah, they went 9-8 last year. I think that's one of the best jobs an NFL head coach has done in the last decade or two in terms of milking wins out of a roster. And I think we're going to get to another one in a minute or two. But I think Sean Payton getting 9 wins out of that Saints roster last year might have been his greatest performance. And now he's gone. So I think that they are going to really, really struggle. I have them actually tied with Carolina for last place. I also have them winning 5 games. I have them at 5-12.
All right. Yeah, I mean, you look at even the year that Peyton was suspended in 2012, like the Saints had 3 straight seasons of 10-plus wins, 13 wins, 11 wins, 13 wins. And then the year that Peyton is gone, they had a losing record. They come back the next year with Peyton, they have an 11-win season. The last 5 seasons, they've won 11, 13, 13, 12, and 9 games. And that 9-game season was without a wide receiver one, and it was with like 4 different quarterbacks playing. So, I mean, Sean Payton's a very, very good head coach. I tweeted out at the time that the trade was made where the Eagles swapped for the first-round pick next year from the Saints. I said, not to overlook the fact that they lost their coach, they're in salary cap hell, they don't have a quarterback, and they only have 1 wide receiver who openly does not want to play for them next year. Mm-hmm. And so like a month later, when they acquired Jarvis Landry, that tweet like blew up. Saints fans started quote tweeting it and clowning on it, and I was like, I mean, update for Saints fans that want to dunk on a tweet from April: Sean Payton's still gone. Jameis Winston's still a bad quarterback.
Coming off an ACL tear.
And they traded up in the first round for a wide receiver, and they signed a guy in Jarvis Landry who was terrible last year. Like, congrats on improving your team through the draft and free agency like every other team does. I just when we get to their schedule here, so they've got the 9th easiest strength of schedule. So their schedule certainly helps them out a little bit. The over-under for them is at 7.5. And you said you've got the under on that, I think.
Yeah, pretty easily there at 5.
So I probably slightly lean the over here just because I think this division is so bad. I do have them finishing second in the division. I don't think they're contenders at all in the division. I just think ultimately it's a pretty weak division. So I don't think it's going to, I don't think they're going to end up giving the Eagles a top 5, top 10 pick. I hope you're more right than I am here. So, I don't think they're going to be good. But I do think just being in that division, they could maybe get to like that 8-win mark.
I think that this is going to be an epically bad division. And the team that I think is going to be a little bit better than expected will be coming up next. But yeah, I am just super low on this roster. Alvin Kamara even has a situation going on where we don't know if he might be getting suspended. That's an interesting thing to keep tabs on for fantasy purposes.
6 games is what it's looking like from the last I'd heard.
I even heard 8 would be possible. Like it's if Alvin Kamara is suspended for 6 to 8 games, I don't see them winning more than 6 games. Like I will run to the casino and place an under 7.5 bet. I don't even have to do that. I don't know why I said it like that. There's apps on your phone, folks, but it's 2022. But I would absolutely.
Oklahoma, there's not.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of Oklahoma, Dives was a fun comment there. Can you throw that last one up?
Yeah.
Who has a more successful season, Chet Holmgren or Nakobe Dean? I only bring this up because Shane is an Oklahoma guy. I don't even know if he knows who Chet Holmgren is, but are you aware of Chet Holmgren, Shane?
I am not.
You are not? Okay, so Oklahoma City the Oklahoma City Thunder drafted a guy named Chet Holmgren with the 2nd pick this year. Do me a favor and just Google Chet Holmgren and share your screen.
Okay. All right. I will. The only thing in the NBA I'm following is if Kevin Durant signs with the 76ers, and then I will hate on the 76ers on Twitter forever.
It's not going to happen. But the Chet Holmgren I might be able to get Chet Holmgren back in, or get Shane back in on the NBA with Chet Holmgren. This guy is 7'1". He shoots threes like at will. He can dribble and break you down and go between his legs and go around folks. And then he blocks every shot that comes near him. Everyone's freaking out because he's so skinny and because he's like the weirdest NBA player of all time. He's a unicorn, Shane. He's unbelievable. He's going to save the Thunder.
How are you 190 pounds at 7'1"?
It's unbelievable.
Get a steak. He's moving to Oklahoma. He'll have some steak. We'll get him through that.
Yeah, I'm telling you, he's gonna get you back in on the Thunder. That's my goal. Chet and Shane at a steakhouse in Oklahoma.
All right. He can come over to my house. I'll cook him some.
I like it.
All right, let's move on to the Falcons here. The Atlanta Falcons. Some of their additions from this offseason, they signed quarterback Marcus Mariota to replace Matt Ryan, who they traded. They signed Casey Hayward, Lorenzo Carter. They drafted Drake London, Arnold Ebiketie. Did I say that right?
Ebiketie, I thought it was Ebiketie.
Yeah, I always struggled with his last name, and it's been too long. And then they drafted Desmond Ridder as well. So maybe a quarterback competition there with Ridder and Mariota. We'll see. Their losses, they lost a guy whose name I have no clue how to pronounce, and I never have. So I'm not even going to try. They also lost Russell Gage. I also mentioned Matt Ryan, and then the Calvin Ridley suspension. So they come in with one of the harder schedules. Not one of. It's actually the hardest schedule, which is surprising to me. I don't understand how this works. But they have the number 23 easiest schedule, while the Bucs have the number 7 easiest schedule, and I'm not sure how that happened. But that's how it shook out. So they actually have the hardest schedule in the division. But they do open the season against the Saints, which is a really big game between two teams that are probably competing for that second place spot maybe, probably not, but maybe a wild card in a weekend NFC East. Talk to me about the Falcons and where you're at with them.
I'll tell you what, this schedule does look really brutal. This is a tough schedule. You look at the AFC teams that they're facing. The AFC North is a tough schedule, and then the extra team they get is the Chargers. Like this is definitely a brutal schedule. I think that extra game being the Chargers is a big factor on why their schedule is harder, Shane. So I think that's a big part of it. But I tweeted it out today. The more I look into the Falcons and the more I look at the roster, and I kind of like the Falcons. Like I'm actually surprised at how much I like a little bit of what's going on in Atlanta. Do you have their over/under handy?
Their over/under is 4.5.
Yeah, I knew it was really low.
I am easily over on that. I mean, I feel like, Drake London is going to be a good weapon for them. I think they've got Kyle Pitts. They downgraded at quarterback, but how much remains to be seen. I mean, I think Matt Ryan he's far past his peak effectiveness. I know you're lower on Ryan than I am. I think he's okay still, but between Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder, you can see what you can get out of them. So I have them finishing third in this division, but I'm easily taking that over 4.5. And it'll be interesting to me. We see what happens with the Kamara thing. I could easily be swayed into them being second in the division.
Yeah, I have them second in division. I have them at 7-10, which I believe is what they finished last year. I believe they finished 7-10 last year. I have them repeating that record. You could talk me into 8 wins. Like you could talk me into 8-9 with this team. So the Chalk Talk lock of the year might end up being Falcons over 4.5. We'll see how we'll keep doing these and see if we both like one as much as we both like this one. But that is a really, really low number. And that's expecting a team to win 3 less games than it did last year, when I don't really know what the pieces they lost are. And you mentioned the quarterback thing, and I know people are going to roll their eyes at this. I think they got better at the quarterback position. And if they didn't get better, I think they at least got more upside. I think Matt Ryan at this point very much is what he is. Like, I think Matt Ryan is somewhere between I don't know. I don't think he's a top 20 quarterback at this point. I know that that's going to rub some people the wrong way. There's people who are buying into what Indy is selling in terms of him coming in and being a top 10 quarterback there. I don't see it. I think he's a complete statue behind the pocket at this point. And maybe the Falcons O-line was a problem, but I think Mariota gives them a little bit more mobility behind that offensive line. And I think Mariota has a little bit more upside than Ryan does at this point, just because there's a chance that maybe we didn't see what Mariota could fully do. Like, I think there's a chance where maybe Tennessee was holding him back a little bit. He was getting hurt too often. He did bring them to the playoffs a couple times. He won a playoff game against Andy Reid on the road. So I think that there are arguments where, hey, maybe Mariota comes in and kind of has – it's funny because the guy that replaced him in Tennessee was Ryan Tannehill. But I think that there's some parallels there. Like, what if he has a Tannehill-ish kind of second run here in Atlanta, the same way Tannehill did in Tennessee, where this guy who we wrote off as a bust, a top 10 pick bust, can come out and at least play average quarterback. And if that doesn't happen, you have a guy who a lot of people are high on in Desmond Ridder waiting in the wings. I'm kind of middling on Desmond Ridder, but I think still there's an upside with the combination of Mariota and Ridder that you just weren't going to get with Matt Ryan, especially when you mention the fact that Drake London is being added to this wide receiver room. I think Drake London and Kyle Pitts are a really exciting 1-2 punch in terms of weapons. And I think Cordero Patterson was used in a really interesting way last year, and I don't see why Arthur Smith isn't going to be able to do that again this year. And basically, when it comes down to it, all of my positive thoughts about this Falcons team and season and everything like that, it goes back to Arthur Smith. I think Arthur Smith kind of kept that team really engaged last year. And the fact that they were kind of in the playoff hunt halfway through the year, like they were kind of in the mix a little bit. And then they end up going 7-10 and they win 7 games in a year where a lot of people projected them to win 3 or 4 or 5 and to be extremely disappointing. They weren't. They were able to fight along while I think their point differential was terrible. They were getting blown out in the games that they were losing and winning games close. They were winning games they had no business winning last year. And I think that that's a sign of a good coach. And I'm kind of all in on Arthur Smith right now.
Yeah, I thought Arthur Smith did a pretty good job last year. If I'm the Falcons, I would strongly consider, unless he just looks terrible in training camp, I would consider just rolling with Desmond Ridder from the start. I thought Ridder I thought in terms of pro readiness, I thought he was the number 2 quarterback in the draft behind Pickett. He was my QB2 in the draft behind Malik Willis, but I think he's a guy that's fairly pro ready. You're a team that doesn't have a lot of expectations, and you've got a coach that's got job security. Like, it seems like a perfect scenario to put a guy out there and see what you've got. And hey, if he's terrible, again, you get to go address the quarterback position this upcoming draft. So I don't know that they'll do that, because it's easier for analysts to say, let's punt a season like that, than it is for teams. But I would like to see them just roll with Ritter and see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I get that argument, and I could get behind it. And maybe if Ritter looked awesome in training camp and Mariota, you looked at him, you're like, I don't have any hope. I do think if I was a Falcons fan, or if I was, in the front office, you could talk me into this roster competing if Mariota plays average quarterback. Like, maybe Mariota just has to be kind of a mobile game manager type guy who can get the ball to Kyle Pitts and get the ball to Drake London. And maybe Drake London is a lot better than even we're expecting, because we have seen recently rookie wide receivers, there does seem to be less of a transitional period at this point. I think that we can kind of stop expecting rookie wide receivers to stink in their first year, as it used to be a little bit, where, people would say, oh, the second year is really where the wide receivers break out, or the third year, I remember that was a huge fantasy thing, third year wide receiver breakouts. I don't really think it's that way anymore. I think wide receivers come in really ready, and I think Drake London, in terms of his athletic profile and his Mike Evans body, I think he's going to come in ready to compete athletically at the NFL level. So I think it's going to be really dependent on Pitts and London a little bit, because I think the quarterback will kind of be made or broken by how good London is right away, and how much Kyle Pitts has advanced from year one. So that'll really be what determines the season for the Falcons. And it seems simple, but I do think that those are the two X factors there.
All right. Well, let's roll on here to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously,
they're good.
They lost
That's it.
Brady, then they got him back. So let's run through it here. So some of their additions, they got Logan Hall in the draft, which I thought was a good pick on their defensive line. I had a first-round grade on him. I think they got him at 33, so just outside the first round. They also went out and got Akeem Hicks and Russell Gage, so stocked up on the defensive line some. They absolutely swindled the Patriots, sending a 7th-round pick for Shaq Mason. And then, yeah, it was weird. And then on the other side, especially on the offensive line, they lose Alex Kappa. Ali Marpet retired. They lose Bruce Arians. So you lose the coach. You lose some offensive line pieces. And they lost safety Jordan Whitehead. So as long as Brady is here, you have a hard time saying this team is anything but a Super Bowl contender. They have the number 7 strength of schedule. You've got Rob Gronkowski basically insinuating that if Tom Brady calls him when the playoffs roll around, he'll be there. What do you make out of this team?
Yeah, they're going to be really good. They're going to win 13 plus games. I think that they probably get the 1 seed in the NFC, due to kind of what you just heard with me saying how bad I think the other teams in the division are. And I think that they easily go 6-0 in the division, which I believe they went they went 4-2 last year. They lost both games to the Saints.
Yep.
The Saints kind of owned them a little bit, but I think they'll go 6-0 this year in the division. And, maybe the Chiefs get them, maybe the Packers get them. The Rams are on the schedule as well. The Niners, those are really good teams, but Cincinnati made the Super Bowl last year. But I think this is a team who is going to be very, very, very good and very tough to beat. Definitely a Super Bowl contender. And yeah, I really don't have much to say. It's Tom Brady.
Yeah, they have the number 7, the 7th easiest schedule, and 3 of the teams ahead of them are in the NFC East that we're about to talk about, which none of those teams are going to threaten for the 1 seed. So I think they're in contention for the 1 seed. Their over-under is at 11.5 wins. I would take the over on that right now. I think they easily win the division, and they're a 12 to 13 win team.
Yeah, I have them at 14. I have them at 14-3, so I'll take that over.
All right. Well, let's roll on now. That's the NFC South. We're going to roll on to the NFC East now, and we'll start off with the Eagles here. So the Eagles, they add Hassan Reddick, who they signed away from the Carolina Panthers in free agency. They also signed James Bradbury to shore up their cornerbacks. They got Kazir White to help with the linebackers, Jaquiski Tart, who can't catch, to play safety. And then obviously you have the draft. They traded for A.J. Brown. They drafted Jordan Davis. They drafted Nakobe Dean, some of the top guys from that. On the flip side, key losses, they lose Steven Nelson. They lost Rodney McLeod, which is a move I didn't like. I thought they should have brought McLeod back if they weren't going to address safety in the draft. And then they lost Brandon Brooks to retirement, I guess on paper, although he has played very little over the last few years. So that's not an impact I expect to feel. They have the second easiest strength of schedule, according to Warren Sharp's analytics, and their over-under Vegas win total is at 8.5 right now. So, Mark, let's talk about the Eagles. Where are you at on this team?
Most of it, if it's at 8.5, I'm pretty sure the over is really juiced at like -150 if I had to guess. So I do think that most sites have moved it to 9.5 at this point, depending on where you're looking. And I think that's where it should be. I think 9.5 is a really fair over-under for this team. Like I would have trouble betting it. I have them at 10-7. I have them winning the division. And the reason is because I think this team was, they were basically a 10-win team last year. They won 9. They went 9-8, and didn't play in
the last week of the
exactly.
season.
Yeah, so they basically went 9-7 when it comes down to it. And I do think that this team got probably a win better. Like you look at the departures and additions that you mentioned there. The departures were all accompanied by adding someone to fill that slot. Like Brandon Brooks. Landon Dickerson filled that slot last year and will continue to do so going forward. Steven Nelson, James Bradbury slots in and fills that need. And then with McLeod, you have Tart, who I know people aren't excited about, but he has been a safety on a really good defense for a while now in San Francisco with multiple schemes, multiple systems, and he can kind of blend in and play different types of schemes. I'm not saying he's a great player or anything. I don't think Rodney McLeod was a great player or anything either. So I don't think that they really lost anything that they didn't at least keep the same. I think that obviously there's areas where we would say they improved greatly. Jordan Davis, a big addition in terms of stopping the run. A.J. Brown, a huge addition in terms of helping Jalen Hurts and in terms of giving us a legitimate wide receiver one across from Devontae Smith. So I think that there is a ton to be excited about with Philadelphia, but there's obviously going to be just like last year when people were too negative on the Eagles, me and Shane were here telling you that Jalen Hurts and his rushing ability gives the Eagles a very solid floor. And I think that the Eagles had a floor that people didn't expect last year. Their over-under was around 5.5, 6, 6.5, depending on the time of the year, which always was ridiculous. And we said all offseason they were too good in the trenches. And when you have a rushing quarterback with the ability that Jalen Hurts has in his legs, you have kind of an 8-win floor. But when you don't have a top 10 quarterback or a top 7 quarterback, you probably also have an 11-win ceiling, to be quite honest, unless you have a perfect roster elsewhere. And there are still some holes on this roster. So I think that this team will be between 9 to 11 wins. I'll put them at 10 personally, and I have them winning the division. I do think it's going to be a competitive division, but I think the Eagles have the best roster.
Yeah, I think the Eagles got better everywhere. They stayed the same or got better at every position group except safety. And I don't, replacing Rodney McLeod with Jaquiski Tart, I think is a downgrade. They obviously brought Anthony Harris back, but they address major deficiencies at linebacker and at wide receiver. And so, I think this is a team that's better. I think it's a 10-win team. I would take the over even if it was at 9.5. I do have them winning the division, which is less about them and more about the Cowboys, who we'll get to in a few minutes here. But I think this is a season – this is put up or shut up time for Jalen Hurts. He has to overwhelmingly prove that he's the quarterback of the future, or the Eagles are going to move on, as they should. They have stacked the deck in his favor, and it's time to sink or swim. And I think that's what the story of this season is going to be, is figuring out what exactly Jalen Hurts is, if he can continue. This is a guy who's gotten better every year of his career, going all the way back to college. He's improved every year. Can he continue that improvement? How big of a leap can he take? Those are kind of the key things to watch this year for the Eagles.
Yeah, no, those are absolutely the biggest things that could possibly happen to this team. And it's a weird situation for Sirianni too, because it's like, if Sirianni would have won 3 games last year and would have went 3-14, people would have kind of shrugged their shoulders, and we would have probably been having conversations this offseason where it's like, we don't even know what Sirianni is, or like people would have, I do think people would have given him a little bit of a pass if they would have completely not been very good last year. But because they went to the playoffs, he kind of puts expectations on himself as a really young head coach still. If they don't make the playoffs, if they don't even win the division, to be quite honest, I think that there's going to start being questions about Nick Sirianni, which is crazy considering how successful his first season was and how young into this job he still is. So it's a put up and shut up time for Jalen Hurts. I'm not going to say it's quite put up or shut up for Sirianni, but I think that this year will kind of determine not just how we feel about Sirianni, but kind of the national vibe around Sirianni as a head coach.
All right. Let's roll on to the Washington Commanders. So their additions, obviously they made the trade for Carson Wentz. They got Trey Turner, Andrew Norwell, help with the offensive line, and then they drafted Jahan Dotson in the first round, a pick that I thought was a reach, but I do think he's going to be a really good slot receiver. I think he could come in and make a pretty big impact immediately. On the flip side, they lose Brandon Sheriff, who has been banged up. He's a really good player, but it's the whole availability is the best ability is availability, and Sheriff hasn't been that for them. And so they lose him. They lose Tim Settle and Matthew Ioannidis on the defensive side of the ball, which really doesn't matter. It's a team with a ridiculously stacked defensive line. Their over-under right now is set at 7.5 games. They have the 6th easiest strength of schedule. What are you expecting from the Washington Commanders this season?
I'm expecting the playoffs. I think the Commanders are going to make a wild card. I think that the Commanders are going to win 9+ games. I have them at 9-8. I could see them winning 10. I think the Commanders kind of take a step up where Dallas takes a step back in the division. And I think a lot of people are making jokes about Carson Wentz, but I think Carson Wentz is going to I think he's going to impress some people and surprise some people this year. This is the best receiver group Carson Wentz has had in a really long time with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. And I'm not going to often say props to the Washington football team or props to the Commanders or props to that terrible organization. I don't have to mention what Daniel Snyder is doing right now. He's like testifying via video to Congress. So this organization is terrible, but they do have weapons, and they did the right thing with Terry McLaurin, going out and giving him all the money and making sure he stays for the next couple of years and giving him top 5 to 10 receiver money. I think that's what he is. And I don't think we've been able to see that yet because he's had guys like Taylor Heineke and Ryan Fitzpatrick and just not real starting quarterbacks, not top half of the league starting quarterbacks. Carson Wentz is the best quarterback he's ever played with. So I think Terry McLaurin's going to have a big year. I think he's going to kind of arrive as one of those top 10 NFL wide receivers. And I think Antonio Gibson's another young guy who I think is going to be important to this team's offense and important to this team kind of breaking out. And then we're talking about a defense where we came into last year off of 2020 when they were the best defense in football, expecting them to do this exact same thing. And they didn't. You have to imagine that there's some turnover luck that swings back their way, and that other things in terms of injuries and Chase Young being healthy and all that type of stuff swings back their way, and their defense at least gets back to being very good. And maybe not the best in the league, but their defense with the roster that they have should still be very good at the very least. So even though they're idiot defensive coordinators going out there talking about the Constitution, I do think their defense should turn around.
Yeah, and you hope, well, if you're an Eagles fan, you don't hope, but if you're just an NFL fan, you hope that Chase Young gets back on track and begins to develop into the player that everybody thought that he was going to be. He had a rough year last year. I think it's a very good defensive front. I think there's some major questions at linebacker. On the Carson Wentz thing, I mean, he is a major upgrade over Taylor Heineke. He's an upgrade over Ryan Fitzpatrick. Is he tremendously anti-clutch? Absolutely. But, if you look at – and Frank Reich did a lot to protect him last year schematically, and Jonathan Taylor did a lot to carry him, but his numbers aren't bad. And you watch the film and you see, you see him try to throw a left-handed pass out of the end zone for a pick six to lose a game. And you clown on him. And it's all fun and games until the Eagles come to town week 3 and he drops a 350-yard, 4-touchdown game on him, which is a possibility. You better believe he's going to be ready for that game. And, I think that Wentz in Washington, I don't know if it's going to work long term. He's got a track record of burning bridges everywhere he goes, but if he can get it figured out, he's still a talented quarterback. And if he can stop trying to play hero ball so much, he can limit those mistakes. They have Terry McLaurin. They've got Antonio Gibson. They've got Jahan Dotson. They've got some weapons he can lean on if he will just do it. I don't have them in the playoffs. I have them third in the division. I do think they're going to fight with the Cowboys for second place and a wild card spot. I think 2 teams from this division make the playoffs. Right now, I give the edge to the Cowboys, but you could sway me on Washington.
Yeah, you could sway me on Dallas going over them. I have Dallas 1 win behind them, and we'll get to them in a second, I'm sure.
All right, let's move on to the Giants, their additions. The biggest addition for the Giants this season is that Dave Gettleman retired and Joe Judge got fired. So insert Mark as the GM and me as the coach, and the Giants just got better. But they went out and they got better guys than us. They also signed a right guard, Mark Glowinski, who I'll be honest, I never heard of, but I went and watched one of his games, and he looked fine. So starting caliber offensive lineman. And then, of course, they nailed the top 2 picks they had in the draft in Kayvon Thibodeau, who was my highest ranked edge rusher, Evan Neal, who was my highest rated offensive tackle. So they swept the first round of the draft, in my opinion. Now, it went off the rails afterwards. They kind of fell apart, I thought, after day 1. But they lose Evan Ingram, which he got overpaid. He's not really a big loss, in my opinion. They lost James Bradbury, who I do think is a pretty big loss. And then they lost linebacker Lorenzo Carter. The over-under for this team is at 7.5. They have the easiest schedule in the NFL this year. Mark, how do you feel about the Giants?
Daniel Jones is their quarterback. So I still don't feel very good about their current version of the team, but I am worried that the Giants are gaining competence. I mean, you have Joe Shane and Brian Daboll there now from Buffalo. Like you mentioned, they absolutely killed the top of the draft. I thought Kayvon Thibodeau was the best player in the draft. I had him number 1 on my board. So for them to get him where they got him, I thought was tremendous value. And then they also got my highest rated offensive tackle like they did yours and Evan Neal. So I think in terms of getting 2 building blocks for the future, you couldn't have done a better job than what New York did at the top of that draft. So I do think that there will be improvement there for sure, just based in that. So I do have them at 6-11, but Daniel Jones. It all comes back to Daniel Jones. I can't believe that he's still the quarterback. I can't believe that a new regime came in and allowed them to stick with Daniel Jones. I don't think he'll be the quarterback next year. And that's really all I have to say, because at a certain point, quarterback, it's like he can't be a game manager because of his turnover issues. Like, there's no scenario I see in which Daniel Jones turns it around and I'm wrong. Like, I just don't see Daniel Jones proving me wrong and becoming a legitimate NFL quarterback at this point. And another random aside here, a lot of the schedules that you've pulled up have made it seem like, there's a lot of games. For some reason, this picture, it looks like they're playing like 10 games. I know that there's 17 games on there, but it just looks very small, like the way that they printed it. Yeah, like that looks like way more games to me. Like, that looks like way more games to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you go to New York.
The Bucs have their preseason games on there.
That's probably part of it.
Yeah, that's some of it on some of them, but it's also just a little bit of just how they laid it out. So yeah, I guess their preseason games are up in the very top right. But yeah, I think I'm interested to see how Brian Daboll does. I thought it was a good hire, but to pretend that Daboll doesn't have question marks it is silly. I mean, he's not. Did he develop Josh Allen, or is Josh Allen just a unicorn? I mean, maybe we'll find out if Daboll washes out of New York in 5 years and never got the quarterback position right. We'll see. But one thing that I do think could make the Giants interesting this year is how he decides to use Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is a really athletic quarterback. And a lot of times you watch how they used Josh Allen last year. He's the franchise quarterback. But then you get down to the end of the season in key games against Tampa Bay and against New England, and you get into the playoffs, and they turned Josh Allen loose and they used him as a runner a lot. The Giants went and they got Tyrod Taylor. I believe they got Tyrod this offseason, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so they get Tyrod. They've got Daniel Jones. You got 2 guys that are pretty athletic. You don't have to be concerned about protecting Daniel Jones. You declined his 5th-year option. Hey, if he throws for 5,000 yards this year, go sign him, but you don't have to be worried about that. So I'm interested to see the offense that Dable will scheme up with these guys, because I think that you could see a lot of them running and a lot of that mobility. And for the same reason we talked about Jalen Hurts having a higher floor due to his rushing ability, Daniel Jones has untapped rushing ability that was just never used because Joe Judge is a special teams coach that should have stayed a special teams coach. So they're interesting. I don't think they're going to be good. I've got them finishing 4th in the division. I would take them under the 7.5 wins, but it is at least interesting to see how they utilize Daniel Jones in this offense. We got a comment coming in here on YouTube that says, now, are we expecting the veteran Tyrod Taylor to take over Jones' position until the Giants draft a QB? I don't think so. I think that Daniel Jones will get this season unless he gets hurt, because Tyrod's not the answer. You're pretty sure Daniel Jones isn't, but you'll see if Brian Dable can fix him. And if he can't, well, they're going to be really bad this year, and I would expect the Giants to draft a quarterback.
It would terrify me if Tyrod got a chance, because I do think Tyrod's competent. Like, I think Tyrod's like a really good backup quarterback. Like, he's probably one of the couple best in the league. People forget, like, I don't want to do a whole Tyrod Taylor thing. I was a big Tyrod guy in Buffalo. I think he kind of got, unceremoniously treated after that in Cleveland and whatever. I don't want to do a whole Tyrod thing. I actually think Tyrod.
I mean, the Chargers punctured his lungs, so they were playing Justin Herbert. That was crazy.
I feel so bad for the guy. But yeah, obviously he shouldn't have been playing over Justin Herbert at any point. But even just the fact that the last time he got a job, the reason he lost it is because he punctured his lung. The funny thing about that is I'm pretty sure Justin Herbert went like 5-10 that year, and Tyrod Taylor was 1-0 before his lung was punctured. I don't think he played very well in that game though, but I think Tyrod is a lot better than Daniel Jones at quarterback. I mean, just to be blunt about it. But you're probably right. He probably doesn't get benched unless it's a complete catastrophe or he gets hurt. By the way, he is coming off of like neck surgery. So like, I don't know what Daniel Jones is at this point. I have no faith that sometimes when I put out a take about like, I think a player stinks or yada, like a draft take or whatever the case may be, like I get nervous at times that player is proving me wrong. I have never at any point been nervous that Daniel Jones it was even close to proving my draft opinion wrong or any opinion I've given about him over the last couple of years. The dude's trash in my opinion. I just think there's nothing there to be excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, got something caught in my throat there. So we do appreciate the comments. You guys keep them rolling in here as we get on to the last team that we're going to talk about in this podcast. We'll close out the NFC East with the Cowboys. They lost Randy Gregory, Cedric Wilson, Amari Cooper, La'el Collins, and Connor Williams are some of their key departures. They signed Dante Fowler Jr. and James Washington, and then, of course, they spent their first-round pick on Tyler Smith, and they drafted Sam Williams, the edge rusher, on day 2. So their over-under right now in Vegas is set at 10.5. Which if you haven't slammed the under on that yet, go ahead and do it because there's no freaking way. They have the 10th easiest schedule. I'm assuming you're the same boat as I am, but there's no way this is an 11-plus win team, right?
Yeah, I guess I won't say that there's no way just because they did it last year and Detroit, Chicago, and Houston are on their schedule outside of a weak NFC East. So maybe I'm just underrating how their schedule is really easy in my opinion, and I think even 10th, Jacksonville's on there as well. So I think 10th kind of even undersells how easy their schedule is. But just in terms of the roster, this roster is not as good as last year's roster at all. So I think that people are really underselling the loss of Amari Cooper and the loss of a healthy Michael Gallup. I'm a huge Michael Gallup guy, but he's coming off a pretty brutal ACL injury. We don't know when he'll be coming off of that.
And why? Like, why do you get rid of? Presumably, you get rid of Amari Cooper for money reasons, but then you don't keep Gregory or Wilson or Call. Like, it was like they moved on from Amari Cooper for money reasons, but then they moved on from everybody else too. It just didn't make any sense to me.
I will say, I do think Dalton Schultz is really underrated. I think Dalton Schultz is probably a top 7 tight end in the NFL. I don't think a lot of people look at him like that. And another fantasy note, probably a top 5 fantasy tight end with Amari Cooper gone. I think he's going to stack up catches and yards there in Dallas. But it's going to come down to CeeDee Lamb. Like, I think CeeDee Lamb's incredible, but they're going to need CeeDee Lamb posting like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson type numbers to make up for the fact that they're missing Amari Cooper and missing Michael Gallup for a part of the season. And I don't know if he's going to do that in this offense, considering the fact that he hasn't really come close to that in this offense. So I think that there's a lot to be nervous about in Dallas. And it's hard for me to keep coming back to this, but when you go back and you think about how their season ended, and you think about the idiocy and incompetence of the fact that they ran up the middle with no timeouts, with that short of an amount of time on the board, and basically then bellyached and complained about like the ref not getting to the line to spot the ball fast enough, like, and then Dak is excusing throwing fans at the or throwing stuff at the refs. Like, I just think that there's a lot that is unquantifiable in why I think that Dallas is going to take a step back. The last 4 times that Dallas has made the playoffs, the next year they were under 500. Dallas does not deal with expectations well. Jerry Jones does not deal with expectations well. He puts an immense amount of pressure on his team. And I think that this is going to be a potentially rough year for Dallas. I have them at 8-9. You could convince me to kind of go either way on that. Like, you could convince me that it falls apart and maybe they even win 6 or 7 games. You could also convince me that maybe I'm overreacting and they kind of stay afloat at 10-11 wins. So I probably don't feel, this is interesting. Do you feel better about Atlanta over 4.5 or Dallas under, 10.5?
I would feel better about Atlanta over 4.5. I think Dallas is around a 9-win team. But the division is bad. They've got some cupcakes on their schedule. And, if Gallup comes back healthy, and I mean, they certainly have weapons. Dalton Schultz, who is underrated as a tight end, although RJ Ochoa from Blogging the Boys tried to make it out like he's a better player than Dallas Goedert the other day on Twitter. And that was hilarious.
I don't think it's crazy.
Oh, we might have to yell about that sometime, but not today.
I think it's like, you could probably swing me either way, is what I'm saying. Like, I think both are pretty good. I think they're on the same level, is what I should say.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got Schultz, you've got, Pollard, who I think is better than Zeke, but you've got the 2-headed rushing attack. You've got Dak. The offensive line is going to take a step back. And the defense last year was one of the most lucky turnover defenses in recent memory. And that always regresses. So I expect the defense to take a step back. I expect the offensive line to take a step back. And ultimately, 10.5 just seems too high for me, but I think they'll be around 9. I think they're going to be competing with Washington for that second spot in a wild card.
Yeah, I have them as tied with Arizona for the best teams that are missing the playoffs in terms of my record is at 8-9.
All right. Well, there you have it. We did it. 2 divisions down. NFC South, NFC East. We've got 6 divisions to go. It'll be divided up into 3 shows, kind of like this. So, hope you guys got all your questions answered about the NFC South, the NFC East. Next time, we'll pick 2 more divisions and we'll run through those. Mark, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Do you have any final thoughts? You go first. Let me think it over.
Let you think it over. I don't really have any final thoughts. I usually just make fun of whatever you said.
That is true. But we're kind of gearing up for football season. I'll just say this. I don't know if there's a lot of college football people out there, but Phil Steele's College Football Magazine dropped this week. And I always say when that magazine drops, like, that's officially when it's college football season for me. And I got my highlighter out during lunch hour today and was highlighting my college football magazine. I'm already looking at the 2023 NFL draft. But yeah, I cannot wait for football season at this point, and I'm at the point where my thoughts at work are mostly dominated by football.
Yeah, it's like during football season, I'm tweeting like a dozen things a day, and now it's like, oh, I haven't tweeted anything in like 4 days. I should do that. There's just nothing to talk about. I need football back in my life, but it's coming soon. Even preseason. Like, can we just talk about actual preseason games? It's going to be glorious, but it'll be here soon. I think it's 66 days till football is back. officially. That's week 1, though. That's not preseason. So just a little over 2 months. We'll get you there. Keep it tuned here to Chalk Talk. We'll be back giving you guys some creative content, some division previews, fantasy betting, all that stuff. You guys keep it tuned right here. So thank you all for joining us for episode 63 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, be sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Those really help us out. You can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'll be dropping another Football 101 video tomorrow, so make sure you check that out. You can follow Mark at @MarkHenryJr_. So for me, from Mark, from the Painted Lines, I know he's saluting right now because he forgot his camera doesn't work. We'll see you guys next time.